Hello. Hello everyone. So welcome to today's seminar of Brännpunkt Europa. So my name is Candice. I'm the chairwoman of this student-led association. And we are organizing seminars and lunch events on European politics and international relations. And today we are very glad to see you and welcome our wonderful panelists for this 1 hour and a half seminar. So I leave the word to Urban.
Thank you, Candice. My name is Urban Strandberg, and up to just recently, I was Director of European Studies Programs, and a very proud Director of Studies because Brännpunkt Europa is a legendary lunch event organizer that fills the rooms with lots of people for very pressing matters discussed by interesting people. Today I'm here in another capacity. I'm here as the project manager of the International Youth Think Tank, which is a project that I have initiated together with Cecilia Malmström, one of the panelists here today. The brief thing about that think tank project is to try to promote a democracy movement among young European people, and so that movement could stand up in defense for the open value society in times when authoritarian and pessimistic ideas are spreading in Europe and elsewhere in the world. So this project summons young people from Europe and bring them together with powerful people like we do today. The powerful people are the panelists, and many of you are students in the room. That is how the International Youth Think Tank also is working. So, and this is a seminar that we organize because we want to collaborate with Brännpunkt Europa, and because today we have a reference group meeting within this think tank project, and the three lovely panelists are part of that reference group. They will meet this afternoon. I will give them many things to give advice on for the continued development of the think tank project. Now, I will soon leave the word to the moderator. The moderator is Jesper Bengtsson. He is a very distinguished public intellectual, one of very few in Sweden. He has been the editor of many important magazines and journals, and now he is the chair of the Swedish PEN, you know, the PEN organization, which stands up globally to defend the right of people to express themselves, be them journalists, be them authors, or be them novelists, defending the freedom of speech. And I'm so happy that you are here, Jesper, and for you students in the room, now I'll give you something that few people know, and that is Jesper and Cecilia and myself. We met kind of some years ago when we were students, as you are, at the University of Gothenburg. So if you think about what the meaningfulness is about studying at the University of Gothenburg, it could be like being like Jesper or like Cecilia or me or whatever. So, but that was a small side comment which I want to share with you. So, welcome everybody. Thank Brännpunkt for co-organizing. And now, Jesper, I will give you the word because you have your microphone.
Yeah, I think I do. It works, doesn't it? Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much for a good introduction. I was wondering there whether I was a student or powerful, but you explained it to us all that what I was, yeah. And when I'm not being threatened by Chinese ambassadors and that kind of things, because PEN is, I'm also very interested in the issue of how democracy is developing in Europe. And we have a lot of talks about that, a lot of discussions about that in PEN, Sweden, and PEN International. So it will be very interesting to be the moderator of this conversation. We will do like this. First of all, we will listen to an introduction of each one of the panelists, and I will probably ask a few follow-ups. And the panelists are, by the way, Cecilia Malmström, as you said. You have already been introduced. And then we have Ana Terón Cusí, who is a socialist politician, Catalan and Spanish. And you are also, and that's a very long title, so I have to look at that. you are also the director of the International and Ibero-American Foundation for Administration and Public Policies. You will understand why I had to read it. And then we have Susan Owen, who is a professor emeritus at Cambridge University. And the topic is environment and policy. You're very welcome as well. We will also have, of course, options for you to ask questions after the introductions and when we had a short conversation between the panelists. So I give the floor first of all to you, Cecilia.
Thank you very much, Jesper. Good morning, everybody. It is nice to be here with old and other friends. Jesper Urban and I know each other from the time when the world was black and white, so it's a very long time ago. But here we are still, and also honored to be in panel with Susan and Anna. Speaking about China, there is a Chinese curse saying, "May you live in interesting times." And that's not a wish, it's a curse. And we definitely do live in interesting times, and quite worrying times, I would say. The modern world as we knew it, or used to know it, is dramatically changing. The world that developed after the Second World War with certain institutions, with a strong transatlantic cooperation, with a multilateral framework, with the European Union that after the World War grew, developed, with the support from the US, is not really the same as it used to be. Certainly there were conflicts and differences in the past as well. I don't want to paint everything too rosy. But there is a changing global world order. And we can see that with the very tense transatlantic relations. We have several conflicts with the American administration, our ally and our friend. The EU is a foe. The EU was created to screw the Americans, as the President of the United States recently said, which is quite remarkable comment. If you think about, maybe not as a Swede, but I have colleagues from many countries, and they have fathers who fought together with Americans on the beaches of Normandy. And then to hear that the Europeans are a foe is quite insulting from them, I have to say, and remarkable. And that has resulted in trade conflicts, in a very harsh rhetoric, and we've also seen the disengagement from the American administration in several international organizations and a total disrespect of the multilateral norms that have served, they're not perfect, but they've served the world quite well. And that is, of course, a big problem. On the other side, we have a growing China, economically growing. They want to assert their influence as a global world power. That could be understood. But the ways they do that is not in line with international norms. They are violating WTO rules, the World Trade Organization. They're challenging the whole Western political order and presenting an alternative. Quite aggressive investment politics, not only in Europe, but overall in Africa, creating a strong dependence and debt for these countries. A country like Djibouti, poor country, has 73% of its GDP is debt to China. So that, of course, creates a dependence that is very hard to overcome, and there are plenty of examples like that. And it also puts pressure on countries who engage, and we've seen that. And you made reference to it, Jesper, we also see a very serious deterioration of human rights situation in China. So Europe is a little bit stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the European Union was created in a world that was more predictable, where there were sort of ways to maneuver itself, and where politics had its strand and economics and other sort of cooperation. So the EU is not fit to navigate in this new world and has to rethink the way it works quite dramatically. And that's painful. And that is the discussion that is going on right now. How can the EU become a more geopolitical actor? At the same time, and maybe even more worrying, EU has a lot of internal challenges. Of course, the normal political ones, climate, security, migration, increasing economic cleavages. But maybe the most serious is that the very idea of Europe, the very foundations that are the fundament of the European Union, rule of law, democracy, freedom of press, open society, is threatened from within. We have governments in Poland, in Hungary, who reject the European liberal order and who want to present an alternative model with the likes of Salvini, with Le Pen and others, to present an alternative to that model. And that is quite worrying, because in the aftermath of that we see a growing populism, we see a very harsh rhetoric against migration, against we see the weakening of the rule of law considerably in Poland and in Hungary, freedom of the press, freedom of organization, etc. We also see several other countries where there's deep corruption in the deep state. We have had some European journalists murdered recently, which is of course extremely worrying. And we see also not only pockets but growing extremism. Not lately, there was yesterday this terrible attack in Germany where 9 people were killed. And I have to say, because that probably if Poland and Hungary applied for EU membership today, they would not be accepted. They do not fulfill the criteria. And that is very sad. As someone, with Anna, we are former colleagues from the European Parliament, who witnessed this, the enlargement process, when we saw the Polish and the Hungarian flag at the square outside the European Parliament. That was a very emotional moment, and I still support that, but it's very sad to see that happening. So we have external and internal threats. It is important that we stand up, defend the values, using the tools that we have in a more strategic way, and try to go beyond that. Is there anything positive? Well, yes, there is. You are here. We saw an increase of participation in the European Parliament election. That was good. There was a lot of doomy predictions that the sort of extremist parties would gain a lot. They didn't. Green forces, liberal forces, other forces grew. Young people participated to a larger extent than before. And the support for the European Union is growing in all countries in the European Union. That might be a Brexit effect as well, or an anti-Brexit or whatever, but that is inspiring. And in the countries that I referred to before, the sort of Visegrad countries, where we do have problems, Poland and Hungary notably, but also Slovakia and the Czech Republic, in all these countries, in the capitals, there is a network of 4 quite powerful newly elected mayors who are all of centre liberal origin and who are saying that we want to work with Brussels, with Europe, with the rest of you, and we're not defending our respective government. So there's plenty to deal with, plenty to debate. The 9th of May, there will be launched a big sort of debate on the European Union future, some sort of conference engaging young people, the civil society, and different stakeholders to see how we can address this together. I think that is a useful debate in itself, whatever it leads to, and I hope that you all will participate. So we do live in interesting times. Thank you for being here, and thank you for organizing this debate.
Thank you. When you talk about this need of the European Union to take a more geopolitical position, be stronger, is that even possible, considering the other internal problems you talk about?
I think there is a growing realization within the EU that it has to become more assertive on the global scene, and then of course means having your own house in order as well. The new Commission has presented itself as a new geopolitical commission, and everybody's now struggling to understand what does that actually mean, because the EU has some strong powers. It is a soft power in many ways. It is a strong power when it comes to trade. It is a strong power as a role model when it comes to defending the multilateral system. But it needs to use the foreign policy tools in a much more strategic way, which is complicated. Ideally, we would move towards more majority decision in foreign policy, because today you need unanimity even to condemn violations of human rights in Venezuela, which results in quite poor press statements. That will not happen. I don't think, though, that needs a treaty change. But you could work in that direction in a more, and use economy, politics, trade, development, innovation in a more strategic way in order to make sure that you are still a player in the European scene. That's difficult.
You also mentioned the bigger global role of China and the fact that China is more leaning on sharp power than before. they talked a lot about soft power 10 years back, and now they are building up their army. They are acting more, aggressive, proactive in the world. Would you say that the European Union is prepared for that, or is the Union a bit taken by surprise? And can the Union, in that case, work more united?
I think it took some time to react to that, because China has quite openly declared its ambitions. It wants to have a strong, totally independent army, not to import anything. It wants to have global leadership in certain key areas, artificial intelligence, maritime technology. The list is long, and it's published in the documents of the Communist Party, so you can read them. And doing that, by doing that through means of quite targeted, what we could call aggressive investments in critical infrastructure, in certain areas where they can influence politics and technology, also stealing quite openly some technology, forced technology transfer also when companies invest there. So maybe Europe was a little bit slow to realize this. It's now putting up some measures. It has to show that this works without falling into protectionism, because we also need to cooperate with China, and we need Chinese and we want Chinese investment, but we should not be naive.
Right. Thank you.
A late awakening, I would say.
Yes, thank you. We'll get back to those issues, I think. Anna, what's your take on the broader question of the challenges for the democracy and the European Union, please?
Oh, well, I was asked to a little bit explain what's going on in my part of the world.
Yes,
But I
good.
can
Is there something wrong with the
explain that-
microphone? Have you switched off?
Oh, no,
your-
sorry.
Do that, please.
No, but it's for the...
Is it okay?
Yeah, but I mean...
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Sorry for that. Which fits perfectly well into your question. As you probably know, we are now one of the scenarios where people is fighting in what I would call two kinds of different nationalisms, Catalan and the Spanish. If I go up and I look at it, what I can see in the broader picture is one more scenario where people is fighting each other to go ahead in a very difficult world towards a new democracy that should be post-national and should respect differences. Useless to go in deep and to try to understand who's right, who's wrong. Everybody's right, everybody's wrong. The problem is that when from the political arena, the political actors are not capable to understand that this is the key issue, what they do for purely political reasons is to go back to what we can call own political culture, although this is a very controversial term, and to the tribe, to the own community, to cover themselves with the reason. I'm right, I'm the reasonable people, I'm the reasonable person, and go ahead damaging all possibilities through old-style nationalism to achieve this very important thing we really need, which is how to live together and how to do it on democratic basis. It's very difficult because nowadays democracy and nation are like two sides of the same coin. Okay, we have the national demos. We think we belong to a community. We think that our legislation, our way of doing things is the right way of doing things. When that clashes for any reason, and it clashed in Spain, it clashed also in Catalonia. I open a parenthesis to say that both very nationalistic approaches started after two serious cases of political corruption within the two main parties, the two parties ruling Spain and ruling Catalonia at that time, different parties. And the way for them to go ahead and to pass through these very controversial issues was to build up again a very nationalistic rhetoric and build up again a black and white scenario where they were fighting for the unity of Spain or they were fighting for the rights of the Catalans. In both cases were totally, that was nonsense. The point we are now in Europe is that we have all those kind of nationalist approaches related. I mean, we have the Salvinis, but Cecilia, I'm also very worried this morning because the news on the European Council yesterday are horrible. And okay, we are all fighting this very nationalistic Salvini or extreme right Spanish party or Polish party approaches. But at the same time, you have at the table of the Council of Ministers people saying, my people is not going to pay an extra coin for that. My people will not receive a coin less from that very EU budget. Instead of discussing what do we want to do together and how are we going to pay that. And I'm sorry, for me, this is also a nationalistic approach from governments who have no idea on how to build up this Europe as a model of post-national democracy. And we really need that. So the point is, how do we broke all this old-style politics, and we start taking seriously that we should develop public policies to solve the main problems we have. And I will pass the floor to this side of the floor to speak on some of them, and how we can reinforce democracy. At this very moment, we are seriously damaging it. In Europe, we have passed from the idea of a European network where different actors could play a role, civil society, cities, regions, whatever, to an Europe where member states are the gatekeepers and they set the rules and they're scarcely open this democratic conversation to other actors. The parliament is doing what it can, but it's not that much in that very situation, and civil society do not still know how to go ahead with that. I could talk like 12 hours on Catalonia, Spain, nuances, why Spanish people feel they are a real democratic nation, how Catalans feel they are the ones who are very democratic and so on, but this is useless. I think that we should look at the big picture and try to understand how we step out of this very toxic political environment in which we live in Europe. Thank you.
And thank you. And to do that, it's good to ask the question, why did it happen? And for a long time, since you belong to the Socialist Party, and for a long time, the Socialist Party or parties in Sweden used to say that, well, in Spain, they don't have the big right-wing party, and they don't, so it was kind of a role model for a few years. Now, then you have the Catalan issue become more heated and a growing right-wing party. So why did it happen in Spain as well?
Well, it's very interesting. This is very interesting. For many years in my life, and also together with Cecilia, I've been very close to the migration issues. To make the long story short, I can assure you that if you put the wording of the Catalan issue and conflict aside, the wording of the racists, that both things work in the same way. I'm not meaning that Catalans are racist, and not so. I'm meaning that the two things work in the same way. In countries like France, For Le Pen, it's more the external enemy nowadays in our land, migrants, Muslims, blah, 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 blah. That was not the case in Spain. Spain is a quite open-minded country on migration, probably because we were migrants, probably because we were internal migrants first, and because of the diversity in Spain, that meant that people who could not manage a different language went into a part of the country where they felt more migrants than in a cultural unified country. And then we went out to Europe in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s. People is quite open-minded. But the internal enemy appeared. And then the point was fighting those Catalans who want to destroy our nation and so on, fighting the Spaniards. And all of this really nourished this right-wing party. They are not very outspoken on migration, not very much. From time to time they say, yes, these Moroccans here, they want to, but they're not very outspoken on migration, they're very outspoken on the internal enemy. But both things work in the same way, okay? So that's why they've grown up. Many people think that if this government lasts and the conflict goes a bit softer, I would not say disappear, they can also go down. Some polls are suggesting that, but who knows? Maybe then they really are outspoken on migration, and you can always grow up on that.
Afterwards, yes. Okay, please, Susan.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. I've worked for my whole career.
I think it's time for me to.
Forget. So I've worked my whole career on issues of environmental governance, and I'm going to set out 3 interrelated challenges for democracy that are related to questions of the environment and environmental governance. The first is environmental limits. Many scientists have argued that we're now living in the so-called Anthropocene, such that human beings have such capacities now to change planetary systems that the evidence of what we'll do will be laid down in the geological history for millennia to come, whether we're still here or not. The emblematic issue of the day is climate change, to use the sociologist Martin Hayer's term. This is the issue that somehow symbolises all environmental problems. But of course, that's not the only issue that we should be concerned about. The losses of biodiversity are now enormous, such that we're probably going into one of a further great extinction. Where there are major problems with resources, one that I've been interested in because of one of my PhD students, water resources, affecting lives and livelihoods in many different places on the planet. Chemical pollution, the things that we use every day are now present in the environment from Antarctica to the Arctic. So there are many problems. The point, though, in relation to democracies is that many of them don't respect boundaries. Pollution doesn't carry a passport when it gets to a boundary. So in order for humanity to be able to face and possibly tackle such issues, there really is a need for willing international cooperation and strong institutions. So following from Cecilia's comments particularly, this is a problem if those institutions are breaking down. How will it be possible to address some of these wider issues? The second challenge, and it's one that's related to the first, is what I would call the challenge of timescales and choices. Many environmental processes work quite slowly. change is quite slow. But every now and again, there's a tipping point. And the system, the planetary system, or maybe even a local system, tips from one state to the other. This is the worry of some about tipping from the Holocene period, which we've had for 10,000 years, sorry. It had been quite comfortable for humanity into a different one. So to address these issues, somehow, as societies, we need to think long term. I'm very cautious about the way we use the word we, by the way. Who am I speaking for when I say we? There are lots of dangers there. But here I mean global societies, national societies, often need to think long term, but sometimes need to act urgently, whereas political processes tend to operate on electoral cycles. In democracies, maybe 4 or 5 years. And the question is then, how do societies think long term when many governments are forced to think about the next election, when whatever the technological optimists tell us, and technologies will be important, but they won't be the total solution, win-win scenarios are not always possible. So the challenge for democracy here is, how do we make, we as societies, as citizens and governments, how do we make difficult choices for the future and just transitions towards that future? Or perhaps, as the sociologist Ulrich Beck puts it, the fundamental question is, how do we wish to live? The third challenge I'll call truth, trust, and expertise. I became an undergraduate in 1972, a long time ago. I read one of the first degree courses in environmental sciences in the UK. I was in the 5th cohort. We did a mix of natural and social sciences. I really did think at that point I was going to save the world. I have failed.
Still chance to do it?
This was the year of the Stockholm Environment Conference, the year that Limits to Growth was published, the year that Blueprint for Survival was published, envisaging us all living in small communities. It sounded absolutely dreadful, actually. But that was a period of huge environmental revolution. It's coming round again. So there's been enormous change since then, however slow it seems at any one particular moment. What has caused that change? Well, political movements have caused it, changing social norms have caused it, the development of appropriate institutions, and science has had a very important role, science and other forms of expertise. Critical influence, but always in conjunction with other factors. Now, though, expertise is under pressure. There's a lot of disinformation, fake news. Nothing new about that. It's happened in civilizations for millennia. But social media hugely amplifies it. There is apparently a distrust of experts. And in populist narratives, which we see emerging in so many places, experts are associated with self-interested and self-referential elites. So the challenge here is that disinformation, manipulation of evidence, and the outright rejection of expertise are not conducive to good democratic decisions. But at the same time, and I'm an environmental social scientist, healthy skepticism and the ability to question what experts tell us is essential both for science and for democracy. So my third challenge is, how can democracies use expertise wisely? Thank you.
Thank you. What you mention here is what you say would be needed to actually solve the environmental crisis or whatever you might call it, is the opposite of what's happening in a way, because it becomes more difficult to use these instruments or international organizations. Is that connected? Because I was thinking, when the environment is changing and there's a bigger fight for natural resources and refugees is a result of climate change in many ways, that becomes the logic answer, this retreat to nationalism. Would you say that that is a proper analysis?
I think that is correct. That the trends towards nationalism and populism are not helpful for the institutions and measures that are needed to address. I don't think we ever solve these problems, by the way. I think the problems themselves evolve and become new ones. When I was an undergraduate, the big problems were, the emblematic issues were different from the emblematic issues of today. So we solved, quote unquote, the problems of gross pollution in the developed countries, but other problems emerged. I'm afraid we solved, to some extent, the problem of acid emissions from power stations in the UK by sending it to Scandinavia. I'm afraid that wasn't a solution, that was a displacement. So it's a kind of ongoing negotiation. But the institutions that exist to help resolve the problems, nevertheless, one of the big factors in the changes that have happened has been political movements, the emergence of an environmental movement, the work of environmental and other scientists. And I think every time we see counter things going on, so whilst we have the problems of, say, nationalism and populism, at the same time there's this amazing youth movement about climate emergent more or less across the globe. And these things are interesting, and I'm always watching not just for environmental tipping points, but social tipping points. And that's often happened in the history of environmental governance. Somehow, at particular stages, things change. Norms change. What's acceptable changes. And we see it in a relatively small way with plastic bags, right? And in a bigger way with the big issues like climate and biodiversity. But when it's never solved, it's an ongoing negotiation.
Thanks. Cecilia, you have taken a lot of notes now during the others. What's your reflections on the examples we have here?
How many hours could we talk? Is that 12?
That was for Anna. You can have 12 as well.
No, but I think I mentioned expressing my worries about the dismantling. I expressed my worries about the dismantling of international organizations and sort of multilateral norms. And I think Susan gave a very concrete example of one area where this is really threatening the global cooperation in an area that I think most politicians in the world at least pretend, not all, most pretend that they care about the climate. And we can't solve this if we don't have functioning international organizations. And Anna gave a very very good picture of identity, nationalism, how we are trying to find something else to. I mean, nationalism has always grown from the fact that we are we and they are them, but how this becomes increasingly politicized right now in Europe, and used sometimes. You mentioned the corruption scandals as a sort of alibi to focus to put attention to something totally different when there were serious crimes involved, and then that feeds into an old unsolved conflict that pops up again. And we see that in many other countries as well, Belgium, for instance. And that is, of course, very worrying. question is how we solve it. And we don't have the answers here. You might, but we don't.
Anna, what do you say about the question I asked before, whether the fact that we have a climate change is affecting the political debate in a way that, kind of nourish nationalism and trying to close the borders rather than this international approach that would be needed, because that would be a paradox.
It is a paradox. I mean, it's probably it's probably
No, the other way.
no. This is mute.
Okay. Okay, right.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you. No, I mean, this is probably the biggest thing we have in front of us. How can we change things for us to be long-term and short-term, as Susan said, capable to manage things? Nationalism is the worst reaction to that. But it's the only reaction when you have no idea about what to do. And I'm sorry, I think this is the case for many politicians, but not only politicians, people who's responsible of different areas of policy making and decision taken processes. As Cecilia said, the idea behind that is that, okay, I have no idea on what I'm going to. I have no idea about what to do, but if we are alone and we can decide our way by ourselves, we will manage. And the solution will be good, which is very stupid, and what we are going to do is to lose a lot of time. I have the example of environmental legislation in Spain. This was one of the big achievements we've got from getting into the European Union. There was nothing like environmental culture in Spain for obvious reasons. And, okay, it was not sort of, how to put it? It was not because very good reasons, but it was because northern countries thought that southern countries could do environmental,
Legislation?
No. That we could abuse the fact that our legislation was very weak to produce cheaper things by not respecting environmental rules. So a sort of environmental dumping. That was the word. Yeah. Thank you. Dumping. I was like, oh my God. But that was very good. That was very good. And I very well remember campaigning in Spain by saying the simple thing you said before: pollution, have no passport, and do not stop at borders. So if we want to become members of a bigger family, we should have at least within the family same standards. Now, I mean, the European Union of 20 years ago for me was a solution for all those things in terms of our own family, and could be presented as a good practice in front of the rest of the world of how manage important things for all of us in a non-nationalistic way. We are now in a more difficult situation, but the point is, how can we get back to this?
You mentioned the environmental movement that was growing in the 60s and 70s and still are, or possibly growing again. Unfortunately, they don't seem to win elections, or do they?
Well, in the UK, they don't, certainly, because, I mean, especially not when we have a first-past-the-post electoral system. That really is not conducive to that. In other countries, I think there's more. They are stronger. In Germany, they're much stronger.
Belgium?
I think here in Sweden there is more representation than there would be in the UK. As we've seen in other contexts, it isn't always essential to win elections to influence politics. Because what's been interesting in, again, this is a UK example, but since what's thought of as the modern environmental movement emerged in the 1960s, in the UK there have been several electoral surges of that movement. So there was one in the 1980s, one in the 1990s, and every time it's been fascinating to watch all the other political parties suddenly proclaiming how green they are. I have a nice cartoon in one of my academic papers. I've forgotten where it came from. This is back in the 1980s, where there was a big surge. The Greens in the UK won 15% of the vote in one of the European elections, and all the other parties thought, oh my God, these people are real, you're going to make a difference. And there's a nice cartoon with the Conservatives saying, we are the blue-green party, and the Labour saying, we are the red-green party, and the then Social Democrats saying, we are the yellowish green party, or whatever it was. But this has happened again. So you can be an influence without winning elections, and I think that does happen. Maybe not enough for some people.
I would like to open up the floor for questions, and you had one before.
One?
You only get one.
Only one?
Yes.
Cecilia, in your words you mentioned something about Poland and Hungary, and at the moment we wouldn't have. Sorry.
It's on.
Is it on? Yeah. Nee, yeah. First of all, Dirk is my name. That's always nice to know who is talking. You were talking about Hungary and Poland, and I got the impression that if it would be now, they wouldn't become part of the European Union. I remember that one of the reasons for taking them up is taking them out of the hands of the red, dangerous Russian influence. So my question actually is, didn't we manage to sell our democracy to those countries? Did we fail as the other European countries, so to say? And then a question next to it: what do we do with countries like Turkey or Ukraine or the Baltic countries? Are we including them, or are we more skeptical at the moment to have them part of the EU?
Thanks.
Thank you. That's a very interesting question indeed. Again, who is we? But I would say that the big enlargement process after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was a huge movement in Eastern and Central Europe to move towards the European Union, to embrace those values, to be part of the European project, to say that now the division ends, now it's one continent. And that was very much supported in general all over the European Union, and that was a very good thing. And in order to join, those countries had to fulfill a certain amount of criteria, and criteria are, democracy, rule of law, independent media, independent legal system, etc. Of course, many of the countries who joined had very few democratic traditions, so it took time, and maybe at the time, looking back, we were a little bit too optimistic of how easy that would be. There was a lot of support. There was a lot of concrete support, not only money, but we had Swedish lawyers and prosecutors working hand in hand with Slovak, Slovene, Hungarian colleagues, trying to help them to build up a system. And many other countries helped as well. And it was a really good thing that they joined. And most of the countries had referendums where there was a strong public support of joining the then European community. And I think that was a good thing. But if you see what's happening today, particularly in Poland and Hungary, where they are dismantling an independent legal system, where they are threatening and replacing judges and also dismantling the civil society, I doubt that if that was then, they would have been able to join. Now, will we throw them out? Well, some countries think we should. It's very difficult to exclude someone from the European Union because you need unanimity. And there's 2 countries who will not vote in favor of that. They will back each other. There is a proposal that is being discussed now, as we speak, in Brussels, to have the EU budget related more also to human rights values. The Commission, the former Commission, said that Poland and Hungary receives a lot of money from the European Union budget. And that's correct, because they are poorer countries, they need to build up their economy. But then you should be able to put some demands that they stick to the basic values of the European Union. I hope that will go through, but it's not sure. The Commission is also taking both countries to court and trying to see if we can remedy, but it's not easy. So we need to keep on pushing and working with the positive forces within the Hungary and Poland, for instance, because there is, particularly in Poland, a strong opposition, to see how we can support going back to a legal framework that is more in line.
Has that done too little, you think, to support the democracy forces?
A lot was done, but of course, I mean, Brussels cannot decide who voters should vote for. And there are different forces in these countries. When it comes to future enlargement, I still think that is a good idea. Turkey is a candidate, but there hasn't been any negotiations for a long time. Turkey is going definitely in the wrong direction, increasingly authoritarian. There are intellectuals, university teachers, journalists, opposition politicians being kept in jail for a long time without trials or accused for very murky, vague reasons. And that is so today I don't see Turkey becoming a member of the European Union. Ukraine could one day. There's a lot of problems in Ukraine, but they are definitely going in the right direction. The Balkans have all applied. Some of them are candidate countries, some are waiting to get candidate status. I think it would be important to embrace them in the European Union and to start negotiating and to keep on, not for them to join tomorrow, but eventually having a European perspective. That is not without controversy in the European Union. You saw, for instance, at a summit just before Christmas where President Macron said that maybe we should focus on the European Union first. So that's a balance, of course. But I think we should keep on working with these countries, supporting making sure that the democratic transition is going in the right direction. Because if we don't, there are other forces out there who would rather have them joining an alternative model. And that is not in our interest.
And that was actually a follow-up question there, because a couple of years ago I met with the Eritrean ambassador in Sweden, or not ambassador, he was number 1 at the embassy. And I asked him what Eritrea would do if the European Union put pressure through foreign aid or economic pressure on the country. And he said, well, it wouldn't matter at all because we have excellent contacts with China and Russia and Lundin Oil. And would they say the same? I mean, is there a risk in putting this kind of pressure on them because they have an option to leave and do something else?
Absolutely, and that's why we should keep on making sure that the option is the European Union. Especially in the Balkans today, both China and Russia are very present and are presenting an alternative model and are saying, well, the Europeans, they just lie to you. They will never accept you. You have to go with us instead. And China especially has a lot of money. So that's quite convincing for poor countries as well. So that is definitely a risk. And Balkans, I mean, they are European. They are on our continent. They are our neighbors. They are our friends. We should make sure that they choose the European course. But in order to do that, we must give them a realistic perspective that they one day actually can become members. And that's why President Macron, who I respect in many ways, but his statement was detrimental for that. That was really bad that he said that, because he made a whole generation lose hope. And that's dangerous.
Next question up there.
Thank you so much. My name is Mats Rosengren, and I would like to address the question to the three of you, actually. There are so many things in the air right now. So, I mean, I would like to ask about what kind of alternative model China is presenting, but I will not. So I will ask you instead of, if you could expand a bit on the reasons, as you see it, why the nationalistic answer is so popular and so forceful today. What need does that answer address amongst the populations or amongst politicians today? And I mean, well, I think I'll leave it like that.
Yeah. Okay, a question to all three of you. Who wants to start?
Okay, I can try. I think, if you allow me a small follow-up of what has been said. You said something on alternative models. I think this is a very important question. I mean, the difference between the world 20 years ago and the world today is that 20 years ago there were no reaction against democracy. Maybe there was some reluctancy, but no public reaction. It was sort of accepted that democracy was the way. Today, there is strong reaction against democracy, and the point is whether we are still capable to export our model or we are really importing other parts of the world model in terms of welfare, in terms of democracy. And that's linked to why the nationalism is today a powerful force. There is something you cannot deny on it. And I can see that in my own community in Catalonia. If they tell me, well, we have the right to speak in our language. Yes, sure. Sure we have. So there is a sort of healthy idea of the community that helps all of us to go ahead and to live together and to feel you are among your people. The point is when and where you put the limit to our people. Is this a fence, or is this a line you can cross and accept that we are all changing? If you take the case of Spain, which, by the way, entered the European Union with the promise of democracy, and is still very pro-European, and for us, Europe and democracy is more or less the same thing after Franco regime. If you go to the case of Spain, what you find there is some different exercises of nation building that took place all along the last 35, 40 years. That's crystal clear in the case of Catalonia, but it's also clear in the case of Spain because the whole idea of nation had to be rebuilt in democratic terms. Somehow this failed. The authoritarians in the Spanish side and the very nationalistic, tribal nationalistic in Catalan side clashes. But in both you can see the strength of this idea. We are the we are the family, we deserve a better life. We will also always fight first for our people. The problem is, as we say, it is who's our people? For me, our people is all people in the world. But it's difficult because this is a sort of exercise that needs some intellectual thinking, while the family, it's genetical. You will always defend your children. You will always defend your neighbor. And the problem is that when you have nothing else but this, no idea on where you're going to, and politicians using the wording of the nationalism, it's very hard to fight against it. It's hard. We should do it. And I think there's the possibility to doing it. But still, when you use figures, as you said, you fail. You fail. When someone says Muslim people is threatening our community, if you say 99% or 99.8% of Muslim people living in our community are normal people, it's useless. How can we fight nationalism? I think the only thing we can oppose to nationalism is the promise of a better future, living together in bigger communities. That's and being capable to communicate that. It's not only a question of communication, but being capable to communicate that as the only chance to have a better future. Otherwise, nationalism is like the family. It will be always more powerful than any other idea.
I'd just add a few thoughts. It's a very big question, of course. One would be that nationalisms are different. There are lots of different kinds. And just taking the example of the UK, the sort of nationalism that... Sorry.
I think it is.
It is on, yeah. The nationalisms that we see in the devolved administration, Scotland, Wales, where I'm from, and Northern Ireland, they're all different, and they're different from the kind of nationalism that has resulted in Brexit. And interestingly, the two are in tension in two of those divorces. So it is extremely interesting. Secondly, I think there is. I don't think this is a total explanation, and I wouldn't dream of knowing. But there is something about being and feeling left behind, and that being left behind might be economic, which I think is a phenomenon we see especially in some post-industrial societies, but also in some of the poorer countries. And that's the one we've heard an enormous amount about. But there is also a kind of demographic being left behind. What we see now is quite a schism opening up in many countries between a kind of older, not university educated population as opposed to a younger, more cosmopolitan, city-dwelling, university educated. And they have very different worldviews. And I've been fascinated by this in an environmental context, because in many different countries where the controversies are completely, specific, those worldviews divide exactly as, almost scarily predictably on those demographics. And then, the third point would be that if there are feelings of disaffection, being left behind, of somehow wanting to blame the other for things that have gone wrong in your life, then that is very open and vulnerable to exploitation by some of the less scrupulous amongst our politicians. So, but those just add to the many points already made.
Can I?
Sure.
Just a sentence. The Brexit case is very interesting as you describe it, because it also shows us that there is a sort of a wealthy, well-considered nationalism. Okay, when the Swedish government go to the European Council and by saying, I'm going to defend the Swedish interest, that's considered something you should do. While, we are in Sweden, Spanish government is doing exactly the same. Okay, and when the UK government says, we are a strong nation, we can do it together, we do not need Europe. No one thinks at the very beginning, this is bullshit, this is nationalism. No. So nationalism is very difficult to fight, also because when it takes the form of a state, for instance, or a nation who's considered being oppressed or whatever, it's very well respected. And it's among us. The point is that this is something from the 19th, 20th century, and we really don't know how to play with that at this very moment.
But isn't there a difference when the answers become more national? I mean, there has been such a trend in the Swedish debate, I think. If you go back 15 years at least, there was a lot of discussions about what international or global answers can we find. Hardly anyone is asking those questions today. They ask questions, what can we do nationally and how can we possibly cooperate with others? But there are no international or global answers, or at least that's not very active in the discussion. Or, yeah.
Just say one little thing here, and that's that it's a little bit trite perhaps, but recently one of the Voyager spacecrafts left the outer boundaries of our solar system, which is an awfully long way away. It's been going for years. And there's that very famous photograph where it looks back and sees this tiny blue speck, and that's us. And the idea that, on this little speck, which is the only one we actually know has got anything like us, we're all kind of fighting each other and not liking each other and aggressive and so on. It's this kind of depressing in a way. But if you're asking what is us and who are we, then look at the little blue spot and think that's
this is we. This is the we know.
I think we move to the next question.
I have a question for Cecilia regarding China's attempt to influence the Swedish press. So there is a Swedish association or organization called Utgivarna who has released an open letter to the Swedish government asking them to take the question to the EU level. So I wonder what your thoughts are on how the EU can help Sweden protect the freedom of press without compromising good relations with China and trade.
That's an excellent question, and unfortunately the very aggressive Chinese criticism vis-à-vis any kind of criticism, vis-à-vis you, yes, but vis-à-vis any kind of behavior seen as anti-Chinese is not only present in Sweden. We've seen very blatant attempts here, which is of course totally condemnable, but we see also there's a sort of manuscript that's being circulated on Chinese embassies all over Europe, where in Denmark they have attacked Politiken for a cartoon on the coronavirus. You could say that it might be a bit tasteless, but you have the right to do so. In France, some of the mayors have been summoned to the embassy because they didn't decorate enough to celebrate the Chinese New Year. And you have lots of examples like this. So it's a trend. And that's why it is more, Europe needs to react on this and have a very, very, very clear view, mentioning individual example, but also the deterioration in general vis-à-vis human rights in China, because it is worrying. It is worrying that we have camps with maybe 2 million Uyghurs who are being treated like they were terrorists. It is a problem about the face recognition, total surveillance system vis-à-vis the Chinese people, but also vis-à-vis all foreigners, all foreign companies who are there as well. And the list can be quite long. There are more political prisoners there. There's a long list there. So the EU has to be very, very clear on that, and has been, but could speak up much more. There are different ways to do that. You can do it, publicly with press statements, or you can do it at meetings. There are meetings at the highest level between EU representatives and even the Chinese president. I have been present on these meetings. I know that criticism has been voiced in that. Usually they take note. Okay, we take note. Wait, nothing really happens. But that needs to be scaled up, I think, and also in cooperation with other countries.
Okay, send the microphone up there. He's first and then you second. Yeah.
Thank you. I wanted to wrap back to my name is Alexander. I was also blessed to be a student here. I wanted to wrap back to the beginning, to the geopolitical remarks you made, or you pointed to the importance of geopolitics, and I think it relates to many of the issues that you brought up, also to environment. And maybe Susan, you can remark a little bit on how does the geopolitical struggle, the struggle of war, eternal war in the case of US, how does it relate to climate change? Because that is an issue that is not debated so much, I think. And I wanted to ask Cecilia, in geopolitics, it's very obvious, and American authors mostly, they make no mistake about it. They call Europe an ally, but they also make it clear that there is one empire in geopolitics, and that is the US. There is one superpower, and superpower doesn't even cover it, because there is, on our allies, none of us Europeans has a base in the US, and they have over 800 bases around the globe. So how do we manage to deal with an ally, or as long as they are an ally, when there is so much war going on that we don't want to participate in? How do we manage to not become part of this geopolitical struggle that the US has been fighting for the last maybe 100 years?
We have, I think we stick on to these questions, and we take another one, and then we get back to that one. Good.
Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the good...
Very close to the mouth, yeah. Yeah. No, it's on. It's on.
It's on. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. And I have a question for Cecilia. You mentioned about the dismounting of international organizations, and we can see that currently there's the coronavirus outbreak. And I'm quoting from the president from Taiwan, that Taiwan is the first line of defense in combating the spread of the coronavirus outbreak. And the WHO should not exclude Taiwan for political reasons. And Taiwan should be allowed to participate, to share our expertise. And that's the quote from the president. My question is, how can the European Union do to make sure that the WHO function in a way that benefits the global community? Okay, thank you.
Good. Two questions for you, but a broader question to all of you. So,
okay. I'll start with the Taiwan issue. Well, I've been of the view, and I've said so publicly many times, that Taiwan, since a long time, should have been member of WHO, which is the World Health Organization. It is a member of WTO, and it should be a member of that as well. And especially now, when we see global health issues, all good forces need to unite. And maybe this is an opportunity where European Union could actually clearly, unanimously focus that view. Unfortunately, I have very little influence over that right now, but I fully share your view. I think it would make sense, because now we really need to cooperate to fight this terrible virus, and also see how we can set up vaccines and so on. On your questions on geopolitics, the European Union can never, and I don't think should, compete with the US when it comes to military power. It is not going to be a military superpower in that regard. EU and Europe and the United States are allies in many ways. It is our most important trading partner. We trade for billions every day. History has brought us a lot together. We share a lot of common interests and a lot of common values. Having said that, there is a tension right now. So how can we sort of rebuild that relationship? Well, it takes two to tango. And the interest to build allies and to engage particularly with Europe has been quite weak from the American side. But what I think Europe should do, and has been doing but must do, is to try to see where are our common interests. How can we facilitate trade? How can we are both concerned about what China is doing in certain areas. How can we cooperate on that? How can we reform if the US is so critical to some international organizations? How can we work together to reform and strengthen them? How can we identify further areas, maybe not working with the American administration at this junction on climate issues, but there are lots of, and Susan knows much more about this, there are cities, there are states, there are actors in the US who are super progressive when it comes to working on climate change issues, and also have the technology. I mean, you have to try to identify that common agenda and to make clear to the Americans that we have tensions, we have disagreements, but this relationship and this friendship is strong, and we need to find those common points where we can still work together. But it's not easy, believe me.
Susan.
Yeah, it's a very big, important question. Cecilia's already addressed some of it. This interaction of war and climate, or indeed other environmental issues as well, is important. I think it might become more important as we move forward in the 21st century. Thinking about what, one of the issues that some recent wars have been, well, if not explicitly fought over, have had at their roots somewhere, is oil. If there is a major shift away from fossil fuels, including oil, over the next decades, I can't quite predict how that will play out in terms of global balances or imbalances and potential for aggression. Some people think we've seen the first climate wars already in Africa. That's disputed. There are different views about whether some of the conflicts have been a result of climate change or they're just a result of other power imbalances and are exacerbating environmental problems. And I think in future we might see, I hope desperately not, but there is a potential for war over environmental issues, about which many people feel so passionately that I can see that, that there could be wars breaking out over different kinds of resources, over even ideological. Take the issue of geoengineering. I mean, this is terrifying. Some geoengineering is reversible, simple, fine, absorb CO2 by doing all sorts of things, or reflect, have different colour flat roofs or whatever. But some geoengineering ideas would involve releasing into the stratosphere things that could never be recalled. And I've seen reports on this that suggest that this might have some unpredictable effects. I mean, basically humility is required here, and what we see is a lot of hubris. And one thing that stayed in my mind was that one of the possible impacts of, I won't say which technology it was in case I get it wrong, but one of the irreversible ones. Oh, this might change the patterns of the monsoon, which would affect the livelihoods of millions of people. Who decides whether to deploy these technologies? In whose hands will these technologies be? Could you stop them being deployed by rogue states or even not states that we... big ethical, legal, political questions. So, I mean, that's rather expanded your already scary question into something.
It's a new thing to add on the list.
Do you want to respond to any of the questions raised?
No, I have not much to add, just to point out.
We will take one more question, and then I want you to just point out one thing before we end this that you think is a reason for optimism.
Perfect.
I think that would be useful in the end.
It's sunny.
Okay, where's the microphone? Over there. Can you send it down here?
Shine.
Yes.
Referring to the title of this seminar.
Den är inte på, men Ja, okej.
Okay.
Så ja, prata lite grann.
According to the title of the seminar, Decade of European Democracy, and Cecilia, you made some very, very interesting starters, but you didn't mention anything about Russia. No, so it's still a little closer to Europe, and I think, have you anything to add about Russia?
12 hours.
Russia is a neighbor, as you said. No, I didn't mention it. We're short of time. But that is also one item I could have put on the list of tensions, external tensions in the European Union. I mean, I think most of us at least, are very disappointed about how Russia has been going. There were some areas of reforms and changes, and that is also not the case. Russia is going backwards when it comes to democracy, when it comes to authoritarianism, when it comes to their policy vis-à-vis the civil society. Putin is staying longer and longer and possibly orchestrating his own successor, and the illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine is still not solved. And that is a neighbor just at our door, which is of course complicated, because ideally we would have decent relations with such a big and important, historically also important neighbor for the European Union. But right now there is a big struggle and I think impotence in the European Union to try to find a way out of this. President Macron again has said that we must, try to put old sorrows behind us and find a new way with Russia. But at the same time, if you do that without any progress in the Ukraine crisis, you also give them right. So that is another item to add on the list of sorrows, unfortunately.
And then we come to the final list of reasons for optimism. Susan.
Yes, it's possibly not a good time to ask someone like me, but I think my reasons for optimism is the same as my reason for pessimism, which is human nature, and the potential sometimes for very rapid progressive social change.
Thank you.
Reasons for optimism, it's hard to say, but I think that we still have managed to keep multilateral and regional international organizations alive, and that's a key issue. I mean, that's a key issue. They're not living their best days, but at the end of the day, even with all the resistances and move to make them be less relevant, we still have this architecture that's in the political arena, in the social arena. I'm now working very much in Latin America and other areas of the world. One key element for me for optimism is women. Women, there is a big change around, not only among young women, but it's an intergenerational solidar movement among women, and they are at this very moment a strong force for change. The other one is, I don't know, I think that maybe all things Susan have explained to us, and the fact that all of us are witnessing with our eyes that things cannot stay like this, will make a switch swift. But this I cannot assure. Still, I'm optimistic.
Cecilia.
I think we need to be optimistic, and I feel very optimistic when I've been watching, sometimes from my office in Brussels down to this square just outside Berlaymont, where there are daily demonstrations against or for something. But lately there has been a huge crowd of young people inspired by Greta, demonstrating for politicians to take action on climate change. We've seen it in India, we've seen it in Latin America, we've seen it in Australia, we see it all over the world. And I think that gives reason for hope, that young people are engaged and putting pressure on us, grown-ups, politicians, to take action, and that they're not giving up. I think that's very hopeful. And the fact that you are here.
Thank you. Give them an applause.
So, well, dear everybody, dear panelists, please bear with me 3 or 4 minutes because I have hope for the future. Well, first of all, so many thanks for you for this very interesting, important discussion. Well, the hopefulness, I think, comes from the International Youth Think Tank Organization. And that is a thing about, that is young people. Listen to the numbers now. November 11th to 14th, 2 months ago, 31 people in the age span 18 to 24 from 17 different countries came to Gothenburg. They worked 15-hour days. They were given the task by me the first day. Now we want to have your best argument for why an open society is the best society. And they stood to the challenge because they presented 10 proposals for good future arguments for an open society. And the day after they presented the thorough argumentation about the proposals in a report. This was stunning. And today, the report is... Could you? Well, the report is finalized. They have been working for 3 weeks now to finalize the report. And I was amazed already in November. But when I read this late night, because it came to me afternoon yesterday, I was even more impressed. So this is available at the web page that you can see here. And one of the proposals, speaking about what Susan was saying of people being left behind. Now remember, the conference persons were 18 to 24. Young. One of their proposals is about reforming educational systems. They are saying that people left behind need to have the chance for a new start. They are proposing to change the eligibility criteria for university education. So if you have vocational training background for 25, 30 years, that would be eligibility ground for university studying. That is one of their proposals. And then the other one is that you must finance this second chance, second start in life for people feeling left behind, because their analysis is that if people are left behind, they would be attracted to political movements that is about nationalism, racism, and so on and so forth. But these young people, they see that the solution is not to blame the ideas about nationalism, but it is about tackling the reasons for being left behind. I think this is very hopeful that young people who personally do not experience the thing about being left behind, but are capable of doing the analysis of others being left behind, I think that is extremely hopeful. I want to end this by saying, by quoting this report in the conclusion. I'll just spell it out. This is the first paragraph in the conclusion. The 10 proposals presented in this report offer a range of different, yet interconnected, policies that contribute towards building an open society. As an antidote to the many challenges that we currently face as a society, we recommend a mix of more democracy, extended and deepened accountability networks, and inclusivity of marginalized groups and voices. These 3 ideas powered every proposal we made and must do so with the ones to come. So this is the message from this lovely people who did this report. Please go and read the report and be attentive and we will continue in the International Youth Think Tank to organize conferences. We will continue to activate those young people to make a change for the future. And if you don't believe me about this, one of the participants is in the room, Peter, who is the third-year student in the European Studies bachelor program, made it in the competition because we had 199 applicants and only 31 made it. And Peter was one who made it, and he was part of this conference. So, well, with all this, I will now thank you once more, and I will leave the word to one of the co-chairs of Brännpunkt Europa, Paulina, who will wrap this all up. And, you know, Brännpunkt Europa have 3 chairs, and they come from different countries. That in itself, being in Gothenburg, organizing events like this together with us, I think is also something which is hopeful. So thank you, and Paulina, now the word is all yours.
Thank you very much, Urban, and thank you the panelists for very interesting discussions. And we have a small gift to you that hopefully is sustainable, is a mug with our logo for each of you. And one for you also.
Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One more for the collection. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you everyone. Please give one more round of applause.